Everyone knows me as the Intune guy. However, sometimes it's good to come out of your comfort zone. And today, as a special episode, we'll be talking about Microsoft Defender for Office. But before we start, look at this mind map. We'll be talking about Microsoft Defender for Office, but look at how huge Defender is. It's a universe. And who is better to talk about Defender for Office than Prav? Prav is an MVP. He's an expert in his field, and I am more than happy to have him in my episode. So please welcome everyone, Prav.
Hey,
Nice
Shady.
to have you in this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, what can you show us? First, please do a short introduction to yourself. What do you do? What's your passion, and why you're here?
Sure. So I'm Parav Desai. I'm a Microsoft Security MVP. I have over 5 years experience in Microsoft Security, and I really enjoy sharing what I learn with the community. So through talks like this, also contributing to books and contributing to other sessions as well. And why I'm here today, I'm here to show you and your audience about Microsoft Defender for Office, and specifically what I've kind of benefited from it and how I've used it from an incident response perspective. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, cool. So hopefully that's come through.
That is a cool chat box.
Yeah, so because we're on the 𝗕𝗀𝗀𝗶𝐿 channel, I wanted to kind of brand it up a bit. So
Thank you.
so 5 things to know about Microsoft Defender for Office, otherwise shortened to MDO, right? So when I say MDO, that's what I mean going forwards. So firstly, RBAC, right? So role-based access control, because if you think about it, Defender for Office is a solution within the Defender kind of stack. And you need the right roles to access it, right? Like you don't want everyone just having access to it. So there's kind of 3 ways to get access to it. So the first way is through Entra ID roles. So Entra ID, for those unfamiliar, is basically Microsoft's kind of identity platform, identity provider, sorry. So the way that works is if you have a role in Entra ID, it will kind of span multiple Microsoft portals. So as an example, let's say you have Security Reader in Entra ID. That would let you see Defender for Office, but it would also let you see, let's say, Intune. It would also let you see a bit of Purview, etc., etc. It's kind of like a wide spanning role. The second way is the email and collaboration roles in Defender Portal. So this is basically within the Defender Portal, you can kind of build a granular role specific to email and collaboration. So, allowing you to see metadata of alerts, investigating those alerts, potentially taking response actions. And then the third way, and the one I'm going to cover a bit more detail in a minute, is unified RBAC in Defender XDR. So this unified RBAC was basically a kind of a long-term project with Microsoft to effectively, bring all the RBACs across Defender together so that customers have an easy way to build like custom roles, really granular roles for particular solutions within the Defender stack. So with that said, let me just go to
just one question from the previous slide. So what's the difference between RBAC if you configure it from Intune or from Entra ID or from Azure? Is there like a difference, or it's just a reflection of each other?
Okay, so that's a good question. So if you do it from within Intune, it's specific to Intune roles, right? So for Intune, I'm not as familiar with Intune, but I think there's like an Intune reader role. Maybe there's like an Intune kind of help desk role, Intune admin role. That's specific to Intune. So Intune roles creation wouldn't help in this case because they're completely different kind of portals. Azure portal. So Azure portal RBAC would let you see Azure resources. So stuff like virtual machines, storage accounts, SQL databases, etc. So again, it's not relevant or helpful in this scenario because this is specific about Defender for Office, right? Entra ID would help, but it's not the best role. Reason is because, as I said, it will span multiple portals. So what if you only wanted someone to see Defender for Office? Well, if you gave them Entra Security Reader, they could also see Purview. You may not want them to see Purview. You may not want them to see Intune, but with Entra Security Reader, they can see both of those as well because it spans multiple portals. So from like a least privilege perspective and the most granular, the best option is this unified RBAC in Defender XDR which I'm going to come on to now. But
I
does that
did
help?
not know that. Yeah, I did not know that because for the past years I've been thinking, if I configure the RBAC in Intune, I can't really see them within Azure, and I can see they are different. Then I was
Correct.
thinking maybe they are somehow I need to migrate them from Azure to Intune. But now after you explained it, it's just, I mean, it's so clear that it is independent portals. We
Correct.
need to think of them as independent with the RPAC, with the configuration, because like you said, if you give access to someone within Intune, for example, or a role within Intune, he doesn't need to see what's going on in Defender.
Correct.
It does make a lot of sense. Thank you for that.
No, no worries. And yeah, just to kind of repeat, so if you have Entra Security Reader, you would see bits of Intune as well. But if you
Mhm.
have Intune Admin, you won't see anything outside of Intune because that's kind of an Intune specific role, right?
Mhm.
So it kind of works one way, but not the other. But
All right.
anyway, so if we move on to Unified RBAC and Defender XDR, and just before I do that, this QR code on the bottom right, anyone watching can kind of scan that, and it will take you to this MDO portal permissions website here. Um,
Cool.
so basically, with that one, that will take you to this page. So feel free to read this at your leisure. Then there's these kind of sub pages which breaks down, the Entra roles. So as we mentioned, there are some Entra roles like security admin, security reader, all these kind of roles. And then you also have the Defender portal kind of permissions, which again you can read about here. But like I said, what I'm going to focus on is the Defender XDR Unified RBAC. So I actually have some pictures here. So basically what happens here is within the Defender XDR portal, you create what's known as a custom role, right? So
Mhm.
this is kind of part of the wizard. So first you need to give the role name. You can give it like a level 1, level 2, level 3, IR, vulnerability management, whatever you want to give it as a role name. I've just given MDO analyst. A description, you can put whatever you want. Maybe in mature organizations, you'll have some sort of change management process. So you should have some change record, ticket number, etc. So if something goes wrong or people want to find out more information, they have some sort of reference there. So you can add what you want to the sort of description and the name as well. Um, and then if we move to the next part, this is basically where you choose the permissions. And these permissions are kind of broken down into groups, as you can see here, right? So you have, for example, the security operations group. So this security operations group would let you, as it says, manage day-to-day operations and respond to incidents. So that's going to allow people to see alerts, allow people to see incidents, etc., right? It may also allow them to see email metadata and things like that, which we'll come on to. Then you have a second group, which is security posture. Now, with security posture, you can basically see a lot of the kind of vulnerability management type data, secure score, like all those kind of components, right? And then finally, you have the authorization and settings, which basically allows you to kind of manage. Oh, whoops, sorry. One sec, I'm still getting used to this tool. You have authorization and settings, which basically lets you see, roles, because that could be like an admin privilege kind of setting. It can also let you see like policy configurations. It can also let you see, like, for example, retention, anything that kind of is impacted by the portal from like an admin or governance or strategy or kind of a configuration perspective would most likely be in authorization and settings.
Mhm.
So what's important to remember here is based on what you need the analyst or whoever you're giving this MDO role to do, you can basically break down these permissions. So if you have a SOC analyst, they only need to see security operations. You don't need them to see authorization and settings, because if they see that, it may lead to more questions. They could potentially mess something up if you don't give them a read-only role. So again, going back to least privilege, make sure you only give the role groups, permission groups, sorry, that align to their business, right?
Mhm.
That's important to remember. Um, and here's an example, right? So this is the security operations kind of permission group broken down. So you can kind of get an idea here of like the different types of things you can do, right? So first of all, you can see
Sure.
security data basics read. So that would allow you to see, the fundamentals of Defender for Office. You can then allow it to see alerts. You can then allow, them to respond. You can then allow them to quarantine. You can then allow them to take advanced actions. So based on what you
Mhm.
tick here and tick these sub boxes, they would only be allowed to do those different things. So from a granular perspective and from a maturity perspective, this is ideal, because then you exactly know what they can and can't do, and they can't do any more than that. So if they were to get compromised, it reduces the blast radius, because let's say you gave them, full permissions, like all read and manage permissions, and they may not need that. Well, if a threat actor got into their account or something, then that threat actor could start modifying policies, etc. Whereas if they were just a level 1 analyst and they could just view alerts, then that threat actor can't change anything really, right? They could just look at the alerts, which is still a concern, but it's not as big of a concern. Okay, so that's why it's important to basically step through these permission groups. It's fairly intuitive to understand what those options are, but you can also see these kind of I buttons here, and those I buttons will basically tell you kind of what they do. I don't have like a visual, like a real-time kind of demo, because this is just a static screenshot, but if anyone watching goes into their Defender tenant portal and then kind of tries to generate this, if you hover over the I button, it will tell you kind of what it shows you basically. So hopefully that makes sense. And then finally, once you add the permission groups, you can kind of see on the left here, we're kind of stepping through a wizard, right? So first we did the basics, which was the name and description. Then we looked into the permissions, which was what we saw just before this section. And now we're on the assignments. And the way the assignments work is you define your role, you define your permissions, and then you need to define who it goes to. So in this case, I've just given it assignment 1, but you could rename this to whatever you want. And then you basically specify your users and groups that you want to have this role. So in my case, I've given it to me, but this could easily be an entry ID group. And the benefit of doing an entry ID group is because you could have PAG, which is privileged access groups, or PIM for groups now. And Shady, basically what that means, I'm sure you're familiar because of Intune, is you can kind of have a just-in-time access to that group.
Yes.
So you need to elevate to that group, and you only can see Defender for Office once you've elevated to that group for a fixed duration. And you can also add conditions like, you need to have MFA and things like that, right?
Oh, that is great. Okay.
So again, from a security perspective, that's a really mature approach. And that way, if someone moves teams or leaves the organization or whatever, you can remove them from the group, you can disable their account, whatever you want to do from a containment perspective. And therefore, only the people that are active and need to see this data can actually see that data. And speaking of data, right, finally at the bottom, we have this thing called data sources. So the way this works is, as you can see, there's kind of 4 things, right? So MDO is there, Defender for Identity or MDI, Defender for Cloud Apps or MDCA, Security Exposure Management. I'm not sure what the short form for that is, maybe SCM, I don't know. But basically, these are the 4 solutions that support this kind of unified RBAC. So in our case, we would only tick Defender for Office because we only want the person to see Defender for Office. But let's say in the future, they start, maturing, we want to give them more responsibility, whatever, we could let them see MDCA and MDI as well by just modifying the role and then ticking these boxes. As you tick these boxes, the permission groups would also change. So let me step back a bit, and if you kind of can see a bit more here, there's a bit of a scroll down here as well. So if you were to scroll down here, there would be other permissions within this for, like, let's say Defender for Identity, the different kind of workloads. So what I mean there is, once you create these permission groups, you should only have those data sources. But if you later on come and add more data sources, you may need to add more permission groups to actually support those data sources. Does that make sense? Like, the way we've done it so far is just for MDO. So if I now add MDI and MDCA, well, what am I going to see within those? I don't know. I'd have to configure those permissions as well, right? So you'd have to step through those and then look for those permissions and then configure those. But anyway, this is the kind of mature way to do it. It's unified RBAC in Defender XDR. And, this is the way that companies should look to, basically do their RBAC. And that's the first point I had for Defender for Office. So hopefully that was useful to you and your audience.
That was. I was surprised with the PIM, and that it's integrated. You can add like some sort of a layer, a security layer from Defender. And I didn't even know that. It's interesting to look outside Intune.
Yeah, there's a lot more portals. I mean, for example, there's even like Copilot for Security, there's Priva, and those solutions I haven't really exposed to at all. So I would probably be as excited and happy as you are learning about Defender once I get exposed to those portals. But yeah, I mean, like I said, for sort of less mature organizations that might be watching, right, you can kind of just stick to your entry ID roles, but just bear in mind that does give quite a blast radius, right? As you mature and as you sort of build better understanding, look to the bottom 2 options and specifically look at the unified RBAC in Defender XDR, because that would allow you to configure it much better from a scalability perspective. Okay, so now we move on to the second feature, which is Threat Explorer. So in essence, right, so Threat Explorer will basically let you see email metadata across your tenants. So, emails coming into the organization, emails leaving the organization, and you have a bunch of conditions that you can kind of manipulate to find what you want, right? So you have, like, for example, sender, you have subject, you have date, you can have attachment, you can have attachment SHA-256, like the hash, you could have URLs, you could have message IDs, all these kind of things. And once you find the emails in the Threat Explorer, you can basically go to what's called the email entity page, which I'll show in a bit more detail. But just before I do that, once again, this QR code would take you to this kind of general Threat Explorer page. So for anyone watching, you can scan that QR code and go right there as well. But basically, if we come back to point 2, so this is the general page that QR code would take you to. If you step through it a bit more, you'll see that these are the kind of properties and conditions that you can use. So basically, you can filter by whether it's, inbound, outbound, delivery location, whether it was kind of blocked, junked, etc. Then you get into the email entity page, right? And then you also have this kind of threat trackers thing. So let me step back and walk through the kind of pictures that I've got prepared. So firstly, this is the Threat Explorer. So when you first log into Defender for Office and go to the Threat Explorer, this is what you see. Now, what I want to highlight here is that firstly, you only have, sorry, I made that same mistake again. So what I wanted to do was this. So basically, this calendar view is basically showing you that you can only go back 30 days. So typically Shady, right, what happens is when you have an incident, if you're quick to react to it, great, you can find that email because it's within 30 days. But what happens if, later on you find out something that, hey, this guy was an insider threat and he was doing something for 6 months ago? You may not be able to find that email. You could through a method like e-discovery, which is outside of the scope of this talk, but I've done other videos on that for anyone interested. But for the purposes of Defender for Office, you have to be within 30 days. And you can see that because the first of, this would be 1st of September here, is grayed out. So I only have between the 2nd of September and 1st of October to do my date range search, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. But just looking at this portal, you
A
can kind
question
of,
here. I mean,
sure.
is this realistic for a large organizations? Because if I'm an admin in a large environment,
Yeah.
I mean, do I have every month to go through what's going on if there's like risks and evaluate everything?
So that's a good point. So you wouldn't do it month by month. You can only do this for the last 30 days. So let's say you had a suspicion that something happened in April. This tool wouldn't help you for that, right? You'd have to use something like e-discovery and then basically apply your conditions. Maybe you know the sender, you know the recipient, you know the date, you know the subject. You can then retrieve that email. This is more just like a last 30-day view of email flowing in and out of your organization. And what you asked the question that, are organizations ready or should they, etc. Well, I would say mature organizations should catch alerts as they happen, because these alerts would happen. Like, you can't tell me that an alert would sit there for a month being undetected. If that happens, then, respectfully speaking, you've got a bad security program. You need to mature that stuff real quickly, right? And things like automation can help as well. Things like tuning your policies and things can help. But again, you don't only have to use this Explorer tool when an alert happens. You can use it for other purposes. So for example, let's say you're expecting an email from, let's say, you've signed up to an event and you're expecting confirmation from that event. Well, you can easily put in the sender domain as that company, put in the recipient as yourself, and see, like, has that email gone to you? Maybe it got junked. So then you would realize that, oh, let me go into my junk folder and there it is, right? It's a bit of a weird use case for this because this is more for security professionals, but I've definitely done that myself to say, oh, well, my colleagues also signed up for this event. Did they get it? And then I realized they got it. And then I was like, oh, why didn't I get it? And I was like, oh, it went to my junk. And often times we don't check junk, right? So you can kind of use it for kind of non-security purposes just to kind of interrogate email metadata. but its typical use case is to look for threats. And on the subject of threats, you can see these kind of categories here, right? Malware, phish, campaigns, content malware, and URL clicks. So malware, self-explanatory. If there's a malware attachment in the emails, you can click to that filter and then it would show you that in your organization. Again, phish, Microsoft has detections which would identify URLs as phish, and then those would be coming under there. Campaigns is a really interesting one because if a threat actor was to send a phishing campaign to your organization, what Defender for Office would do is it would group them together to say, hey, here's a campaign affecting like, I don't know, 500 users. And then you can very easily take remediation actions on those 500 users, which could be things like purging those emails, right? And preventing them from coming into the organization by blocking the sender in future, etc. Content malware is a really interesting one. It's basically malware found in SharePoint or OneDrive, and I believe maybe even Teams now, because ultimately anything stored in Teams is ultimately stored in SharePoint one way or another. So I believe that's what that option is. I'm not as familiar with it, but that's what I believe. And then you also have URL clicks. So URL clicks is really powerful because let's say you have a phishing email with a URL, you'd want to know who clicked on that URL, because if they didn't click on it, it's likely that they probably didn't enter their credentials, most right? It's kind of a reasonable assumption to make. But if they clicked on it, you don't know whether they entered their credentials or not. So from a security perspective, if they clicked on it, I would still reset their credentials because you can't guarantee whether they put the credentials in or not. And it's far easier to reset the credentials than to let them persist with a threat actor. And oftentimes, even if you ask a user, right, did you click on the email? They may not remember, right? Or they may panic when you're approaching them and they get scared and then so they lie, right? So either way, if you can see those URL clicks, it's always best to take remediation actions by resetting the credentials.
This is okay. Makes a lot of sense actually now. Okay.
So this is the Threat Explorer. Sorry, were you going to ask something else or?
No, because now I'm thinking within Intune you have you have to manage the devices to have a full secure, to fully protect your device, and it has to be fully managed. That means it needs to be enrolled in Intune. And
Correct.
what I'm assuming in here within Microsoft Defender for Office, which is it just protects mainly Edge, because Edge is within the Office 365. Does that, I mean, but it still goes to the managed device. That means if, let's say, if the user is using Chrome or whatsoever, it still will be detected, isn't it?
Kind of. So maybe you're seeing it slightly wrongly. So it's not more for Edge, it's more like Exchange Online. So it's like your emails flowing in and out of the organization, regardless of which browser you use, right? You could use Chrome, you could use Edge, you could use Firefox. That won't affect. That is more affected by another tool called Defender for Cloud Apps, and maybe we can cover that in a future season. But for this is just Defender for Office, which would monitor email going in and out of your organization.
Okay, so it will. Okay, so it will analyze the link, the URL link before it comes in. Okay, now I get it.
And the attachments and the attachments as well. Correct. Yeah.
So before it's even been clicked, that is awesome.
Yeah, and there's a feature which I'll come on to towards the end called Zap, which would, if it detects kind of malicious URLs, etc., it would prevent that email from even hitting the user inbox and would go to the quarantine. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So just moving on, right? So these are the kind of examples of conditions, as I mentioned. So you can basically do by the sender, you could do by the recipient, you could do by the subject, you could do by all these other kind of options as well. Like if you know a particular malware family is targeting your organization, you could filter on those. And basically, you can kind of build up what's known as a query with these conditions, right? So I could say, okay, I want to find emails from Shady to me with the subject CloudFox, right? And then you can then hit run or refresh, and then basically the bottom part here, you can kind of see this chart. This chart would update based on the accurate emails matching those conditions, right? And then you can basically find those emails. And so once you find an email, right, you can basically like something like this. So let's say here we have 4 emails, right? These are just generic ones from Microsoft, apart from the last one, which might be a bit controversial, so we won't go there. But but basically, let's say we choose this Enter ID Protection Weekly Digest. So when you click on this one, you'll see on the right-hand side, this opens this kind of pane. And here you're getting kind of a summary of that email. So I can immediately see that there's 19 links, right? These 19 links could be legit. They could be malicious, right? What are those links? We'll find out in a minute. But you can at least see some basic kind of delivery details. So you can see like where it originally landed, right? So what I mentioned to you, Shady, before, right? If for example, I registered for an event and I didn't see it, it's probably because it went to my junk. What would happen is this original location would say junk. And then as I move it to, let's say, my inbox, this would change to say inbox on the latest delivery location. Does that make sense? Like original
Yep.
location is where it lands in the first place, and then latest would be after it's scanned and moved, where's the user got it currently, right? And that's kind of a point in time snapshot, right? Because if I was to do it now inbox and then tomorrow I move it into, I don't know, for some reason I move it into sent mail, then obviously this would change to sent mail once I check it, right? You can also see if it's delivered or not, and you can get some kind of metadata basic about the email. So for example, the sender address, right? Here's the address for Microsoft.com. Here's the other kind of no reply Azure one that they use. Here's the IP address, which is a Microsoft IP address, right? So you can kind of get an idea here, but you can go even deeper. And the way you go even deeper is this option here, which is open email entity. So if I go to that one, which I've got a screenshot of here, this is the email entity page, and this email entity page basically is specific for that email, right? So here on the left hand side you can kind of see the same kind of metadata, but on the right hand side is where the juicy stuff is. So firstly, if you see these options here, you have something called take action. Take action could be soft delete it, quarantine it, report the sender, whatever you want to do, right? But you can also see email preview. And why email preview is helpful is because you can get an idea of what that looks like. So if it's a malicious email, without even downloading the email, you can kind of see what's in the body, right? The body could be something like, I don't know, I've sent you a file, here's the password, please find it attached, open it, whatever, right? Or there could be like a screenshot of a SharePoint site that's inviting you to click, but it's actually a malicious site. So email preview is very powerful. And for those in the audience wondering, well, what if I preview emails that I'm not supposed to? It is audited in the unified audit log under the operation admin mail access. So be careful, misusing this tool. So only use it to preview emails that you should be previewing, is the point there. But basically, you can see that these are the four kind of different options here. So you've got like timeline, analysis, attachments, URL, and then you've also got similar emails. Now, timeline is really helpful because as you can see, this email went straight to my inbox. But let's say I then moved it to junk, and then I moved it to sent items, and then I deleted it, whatever. All this timeline would capture that, right? So you can kind of see the life cycle of that email. Okay. Then you have analysis, which I have an image for here. So analysis would let you see the internet message header, basically. So with the message header, you can kind of look for spoofing. Those in the audience that are familiar with email security would know about SPF, DKIM, and DMARC to basically validate, the authenticity of the email. Like, is this actually from Microsoft? How would I know? I'd have to look at the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, right? And those kind of things. And then you can also see, different kind of the email size. You can see other detection details, etc. The one you asked me about, Shady, right? URLs. So here are the URLs in that email, right? So I can already see these URLs without even opening that email or downloading that email. And I can be like, okay, well, aka.ms, learn.microsoft, these all seem fine. But what if there was something like xxy.yz g.space or something that could be malicious, that could be suspicious, right? And then I may want to do some investigations. But what you'll see is that there's a threat column here, and this threat column will sometimes say phish. And if even one URL says phish, then this email would be detected as phish and therefore wouldn't hit the user's inbox, right? Based on your sort of policies. The default policy is that if the threat is phish, then it shouldn't hit your inbox and should go to the quarantine.
Threat, if you under the threat, if it says phish, is it being evaluated by Microsoft, or what is it? What is it coming from that is confirmed this is a phish link?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, it's based on Microsoft signatures, but you can also enhance that. So one thing I'll comment towards the end is about submissions. And with submissions, you can basically submit an email that came through, but maybe it shouldn't have come through. So you can kind of report it to Microsoft. And if Microsoft confirm that, yes, it is malicious, then that will then prevent it from coming to your organization in future. And depending on your config around ZAP, then it can also try and purge those emails. But to answer your question in brief, yes, it's based on Microsoft's sort of detonation technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Okay.
So that's basically point 2 in a nutshell, which was Threat Explorer. So hopefully that was useful to you and your audience as well. The third one is KQL hunting. So KQL stands for Kusto Query Language. If you're familiar with, I don't know, in Intune does it directly apply, but in Azure, if you've queried like resources like Activity Log or Log Analytics Workspace or Azure Monitor, chances are you're using KQL because it's the same language across all of Microsoft Security. Now, why KQL can help specifically for Defender for Office is, once again, you can kind of proactively threat hunt for emails that you're interested in, right? So let's say I know that there's a malicious domain and I want to see, like, has that malicious domain sent emails to my organization? I can do that, right? The sample query would be something like email events where sender domain equals whatever that domain is, and then maybe I do a count. Okay, and then that would show me like up to the last 30 days how many emails that domain sent me. Okay, another example could be like, okay, I want to know, have we had any emails lately with the URL of I don't know, Microsoft.com, right? So then you could say the query would be something like email URL info, where domain or URL domain, I think it's called, equals Microsoft.com, right? Now, two things that keen people listening may have noticed. I mentioned email events for one, and I mentioned email URL info for the other. The reason why is because there's different tables across Defender for Office. But before I get too ahead, let me just recap a bit. So firstly, there is again a QR code here, which will take you to this email attachment info. So anyone watching can scan that. And if we go to that page, this is basically that page, which is the email attachment info table. But as I mentioned, there's quite a few tables, right? In fact, all these are the Defender for Office. Oh, sorry, I keep making that mistake. Let me do that again. So all these four are the tables, right? So you have attachment info, you have email events, you have post-delivery events, and URL info. So attachment info, it's not rocket science. It will basically give you data about the attachments in those emails. Email events is basically emails flowing in and out of your organization. Post-delivery is like after it was delivered, what actions were taken on it. For example, if it was purged, if it was quarantined, etc. And then URL info basically shows you information about the URLs within those emails, right? And just to see an example of it, this is a sample query. So here, this is what's known as a table. And then these are kind of like operators, right? And then these are like column headings that you can then manipulate. And then these are the values. So what this query is saying is show me the emails where the direction is outbound, as in leaving my organization, which has an attachment, because you can see attachment count is more than 0, which means it has to be 1, 2, 3, etc. Then I'm joining. The concept of joining basically allows you to join these tables, right? And the reason why you need to join these is because the email events table doesn't contain data about the attachments. Yeah. For the attachments, you need to join it to the attachment info. And when you join tables, you need to join on a common value, common column, which in this case is network message ID, because the message ID appears across both columns. So again, what this query is saying is show me the emails where this is leaving my organization and has an attachment. I'm then joining on the attachment table based on the message ID. Project is basically saying, give me only these columns. And the columns I want to see are the time when it was sent, the subject of the email, who sent it, who received it, the message ID, any files that was in the attachment, and how many attachments were attached to it, right? I haven't run this query because obviously that would be a bit sensitive, but in effect, what this is basically showing you is it's showing you emails that are sent to an external domain that include attachments. And why this could be helpful is because let's say you want to know, who's potentially exfiltrating data through email. This could be a way to find out, right? But hopefully you're starting to get a feel of the KQL kind of structure.
Yes.
You basically have a table, you have like conditions you apply, you can then join it to another table based on a value, then you choose what fields to show, and then take 1000 basically just gives you 1000 results from that table. Yeah.
Okay, is there like to take like 1000, is there like is it like limited to 1000, or you can extend it to, I don't know, more than 1000?
Good question. So from what I know, it can support up to 10,000 results.
Okay.
Any more than that, you can, I think, use the APIs or other mechanisms to do it. But natively in the portal, it will give you 10,000 results. But the idea is that you should be able to filter your query enough that you only have the results that you need, right? Because those 10,000, I doubt you're really going to need 10,000 emails. And even if you have 10,000 emails matching this use case, maybe you could group them into something. So they all go to, let's say, Microsoft.com. Well, okay, then that reduces your 10,000 to 10 groups of 1,000, let's say. And then you can kind of reduce it further and further and further.
Further,
So
yeah.
you can have an accurate kind of representation of that data.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay.
So that's the email attachment info. I won't go on too much about the other tables, but just that kind of high level. This is the email events table. So email events table, you know, Shady, you asked about phish. So this is a sample query. You can get the number of phishing emails from the top 10 sender domains. So the way you do that is you have the email events table. In this case, you don't need to join any other table because all the data is within this table. Then you're applying a condition of threat type is phish, which is again based on Microsoft detections, right? And then you're summarizing. So summarize, for people not familiar, is kind of like an aggregate function. So it's basically saying, give me the count based on the domain where the classification has been phish. So the way this kind of output would look like, if people want to kind of imagine or visualize, is that it would have, you know, domain, let's say like Microsoft.com, and then it would have a count for like 10. Then it would have like, you know, Apple.com 5, you know, Tesla.com 6, etc. So that way it's handy because then you can see how many domains are giving you how many emails, and then you can, you know, basically sort it by, in this case, the top 10 domains. So then you'd know that those are the top 10 to maybe block because they keep sending you phishing emails, right? So that's an example of email events. And then email URL info. Again, as I mentioned, you can basically find URLs in an email that you want to look for. This one is a really interesting query because there's a let statement. And the let statement is really helpful because let's say, in this case, it says it's looking for a message ID, but let's say instead of a message ID, we had certain URLs we wanted to look for, right? Again, let's say Microsoft.com, you know, Tesla.com, Apple.com, Amazon.com, whatever. You can basically build like a let statement with all those domains, and then basically find those emails that were containing those URLs with those URLs. Once again, you can see we need to do a join. Reason is because the URL info data is not in the email events table. It's only in the URL info table, right? So once again, you need to make a join. And as we saw before, to join it, you need a common value. And once again, the common value is the network message ID, right? So hopefully that kind of helps and makes sense. And then the last example I have is the post-delivery events table. So as I said, this is what's logged once the email is actually delivered, based on what an admin does to it or what a user does to it. So here's a sample kind of query to say admin action, right? So you can basically see what actions has an admin taken once an email has been delivered, which could be quarantine, which could be report to submission to Microsoft or to the SecOps team, you know, and things like that, basically. So I won't kind of harp at the point, but all these links you can kind of get to from the first link, from that QR code. You just have to follow these 3 links at the bottom. So that's the third point. Hopefully that was also useful. Cool. So then oh, sorry, did you have any questions?
No. This is really good. A lot of information compact, but go ahead, please.
Sure. So then we move on to 4A. And the reason why I've got 4A is because there's a 4B, which we'll come on to in a minute.
Okay.
But basically, part 4 is the TABL. So TABL stands for Tenant Allow Block List. So Shady, as we keep saying, right, we've definitely covered topics like malicious domains, phish emails, etc. Well, what if you don't want those phish organizations to send you any more email, right? You would add them to this Tenant Allow Block List. And once again, there's a QR code here for anyone to scan. It will basically take you to this page, which we'll come on to now. And that basically allows you to manage your allows and blocks in the tenant list, right? So firstly, you can create a block list. So with a block list, you can choose the domains, right? So let's say, you know, ironically, I mean, it probably won't happen, but let's say Microsoft.com, for some reason, we're a malicious organization or whatever, then you could basically add them. And then therefore, any emails from that domain would be blocked. It would be marked as high confidence phishing, as it says here, and it will be automatically moved to quarantine. So again, Shady, as we mentioned earlier, right, this would happen before it's even delivered. So the user wouldn't see this at all. It would straight away go to quarantine, and the users typically don't have access to their quarantine, right? So they wouldn't be able to release it, etc. Only admins can do that if everything is configured correctly. You can also block based on files. So you can specify like hashes of files, and you can also block based on URLs as well. Okay, so URLs in the email, you can then block them, or you can block by domain. So to repeat, you can block by domains, you can block by files, or you can block by URLs. You can also block by spoof senders. I'm not as familiar with spoof senders, so I'm not going to go into that for this talk. But yeah, there is a bar you can block on spoof senders, and you can also block by IP address as well. Typically, these blocks will expire after 30 days. The reason for that is maybe because only on a short term you want to basically block those domains. Then maybe those domains that have been compromised are kind of, made legitimate again, etc. They could be a legitimate supplier that you're working with, etc. So they could be then unblocked, so then you can carry on the communication. But if you're worried about that, you can actually set it up to 90 days, or you can set it to never expire. So if it's actually truly malicious and you don't think it's going to get repurposed again, block it completely forever, right?
And what
then
is
you
the
also
best practice here? I mean, what would you choose?
That's a good question. It depends. So I would say if it's like known to be malicious fish, so let's say it's attributed to some threat actor or threat campaign, then chances are it's never really going to get used legitimately. So you would probably do never expire. If it's a supplier that got compromised, but you do active business with them, etc., then maybe leave it for 30 days and give them some time to kind of resolve it their side, right? You can always modify this in between as well, and I'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
So if you set it for 30 days, and let's say you approach them on day 28, like, hey, how are you guys getting on with remediating your incident? We're looking to unblock you. Can you give us confidence, etc.? Let's say they say, sorry, we need some more time because we're going through some legal work or whatever. You can change that to then say, okay, now I want to block it for a further 10 days or 15 days or 30 days because they haven't proven themselves to me. So the best practice would typically be 30 days, but I would say it depends. If it's truly malicious, then best practice would be never expire, because why would you want a malicious organization to have any chance of hitting your organization, right? You also have allow entries. Allow entries you can't actually directly create. You basically need to kind of raise it to Microsoft. Once it's confirmed to Microsoft and they validate it, then it would be allowed. And the reason for that is because this bypasses all your controls. So if someone was to add this allow entry, and it's not possible currently, but if there was a way in future Microsoft introduced, etc., a threat actor or an insider threat or whatever allowed a malicious domain on this allow list, they're coming straight through to your inbox, right? They're bypassing all your controls, they're bypassing all your transport rules, any sort of filtering you have, any sort of spam detections, malicious detections, they're coming straight through. So this is a very powerful capability, and therefore Microsoft currently doesn't allow you to create entries in the list directly. You have to raise it to Microsoft, and then they will kind of validate it and approve it. This may change in the future, and I think if this does change in the future, Microsoft needs to add some sort of checks and balances to make sure that the person adding it is doing it legitimately and it's not an insider threat. And I don't have suggestions on how they can do that, but that's for them to figure out if they entertain it. If not, then this should just stay as it is, because in my eyes, you shouldn't really have that many allow entries. More likely, you're going to use this to block. You're not really going to use this to allow, right?
Okay.
So basically that's part 4A, which is the TABL, kind of an essence of what the TABL is. Okay, so 4B is the TABL auditing. Now, for those of you that may know, I'm a really big fan of auditing. I've really dove deep into the Microsoft 365 Unified Audit Log, which is basically what captures any activity made in your tenant from an M365 perspective. And for TABL, I specifically have this article here. Once again, the QR code will take you right there if you scan it. But basically, it's this page within my sort of deciphering UAL series. Now, I'm not going to walk through this fully just in the interest of time, but in essence, when someone creates a TABL entry, it will log this kind of operation that you can then basically find in your tenant and look at the kind of audit event, which is this audit event here, and you can see some properties, right? So for example, I can see when this was done, I can see who did it, I can see what they added, etc., right? In this case, let's say it's a Zoom URL that they've added, and I can also see how long it's been blocked for. For example, you can see expiration date in this case was 9th of November 2023, which means after then it would be removed, right? Now, the scenario I came up with on this page was a really interesting one, and Shady, I want to kind of hear your thoughts on this maybe as well. If someone, for example, in your organization knew that you did legitimate business with a supplier, and they then added that supplier's URL to the TABL to block them, can you see how that would disrupt business? Because no emails from that organization would hit your organization, and they're a valid supplier. And that's exactly what this page walks through, right? So you can see here, where have I mentioned it? Here, to say basically examples of such URLs could be supplier vanity URLs, could prevent emails with business critical URLs from reaching the organization as a method of impact. Okay, then you'd want to know kind of, what URL was added, was it successful, who added the URL, when is it set to expire, etc. Because that is definitely an insider threat scenario where, like, okay, I want to disrupt the business. I know my company talks to supplier one. I'm going to add supplier one's URL with a block action so that any emails from that supplier can't reach my organization, and therefore, business cannot be done. That is a really dangerous scenario. Okay. And what you can do is, one, you can audit it. So, this page walks you through how to audit it, look for that event, etc. But you can also set up a detection rule for new entries being added, and maybe you could have that as an alert. And maybe you could add even the URLs that you're concerned about. So maybe it's worth kind of setting up a watch list in Sentinel for those that are familiar, or a lookup table in Splunk, right? With those kind of business supply URLs, so that in the event those are added, you would at least know about them and be able to take preventive actions. You can also, sorry,
this is actually just remind me of a use case that I had, where the SOC team, they just said we need to block certain external links or external domains from entering our tenant. But however, they were, I believe, they were somehow, those externals, they were exposed to some phishing on or whatever, which impacted my customer at that time, and they got cyber attacked and so on. But sometimes, the idea behind it was like the directing manager. He was like, no, just he told the SOC team, no, just go ahead, open it for them. They are, we are confident nothing will come from their side. But a couple of months, I think a year after that, that company that got attacked, and they got a cyber attack, and it was a big, huge disruption for their business.
Wow.
However, sometimes I think the takeaway from this is, sometimes you need to really listen to what the SOC team has to say, and the managing director. I just need to find some sort of a middle ground into that. It's sometimes it's very hard, because the director manager, he wants to do business, and the SOC, they're trying to protect their environment. But sometimes it's just, I think that was like 5 years ago, and that time Microsoft had, not as advanced as now, from security perspective.
Yeah, I think, without slightly going outside of the scope of this talk, but I think with that one, managing director, etc., right? If it had been conveyed to them to say this is the risk, maybe they could have resonated with that and understood. If it's just communicated to, like, say, the security issue, whatever, some people may not care about it in that way, right? But if you speak to them in the risk language, specifically around if there's this risk and you get fined, that's the way to get them on side. And I think you're right that the security is always there to protect the organization. The board and the directors, etc., they just want the business to continue. Well, you can't have the business continue if you have risks and fines and things like that. So that is the language to speak to them. From our point of view, yes, it's a security concern, but we often have to translate that into a risk or into a fine kind of situation to make them realize, right? But sorry to hear that what situation you're happened. I'm sure it's quite common across the world, but is what it is. Hopefully they've learned from it and are taking the SOC more seriously now.
So. Some organizations, even though they got attacked, they just never learned from it, and they still keep
getting attacked. Yeah, listen to your SOC team, man. Your SOC team are the ones that know best about what to advise and things, right? And there should almost be some kind of SOC consultant or something that can help translate the SOC's kind of wants and needs to the higher business. Right? That's important, because if the SOC emails like the director, they're going to speak in a very security technical language. The director's not going to care. He's not going to listen. You need to translate what you're asking in a way that's actually going to impact the business in a positive way. you know.
This is a good point.
So yeah, but anyway, let's come back to Defender for
Yeah.
Office. But so basically, yeah, so the takeaway there is, you know, if this was to happen in that scenario with the TABL, you can audit it, you could set up a detection rule. And you can also, I haven't really covered this yet on my deciphering series, I've been meaning to, it's been quite a while, but part 9 is going to be the entry being modified. And as I mentioned to you, Shady, when you modify it, the only thing you can really do is change the expiration date, which would basically then mean, like that scenario, that okay, I've set it to 30 days, now I want to extend it for a further 40 days, and things like that, right? Here you go. You can see in most cases you can't modify the sender URL file or IP after you create the entry, but basically all you can change is the expiration date. Right, here you go. This example changes the expiration date of the entry. So if that was to occur, you can basically audit for this operation. Right, set tenant allow blocklist items. If you remember previously, it was new tenant allow blocklist items, right? This one is set tenant allow blocklist items. And then finally, you also have remove tenant allow blocklist items. So what this allows you to do is audit when the TABL entries are removed. Okay, and why that's important is because, again, let's say an insider threat wanted to disrupt business. Maybe they're leaving the organization. Okay, so let's say they're leaving within, I don't know, a week or two. Okay, so they create the TABL entry, they block legitimate business from reaching your organization. Maybe they don't use the set one because they just create it correctly, and then maybe 2 days before they leave, they remove it. So then they think that, oh yeah, I'm undetected, no one's going to find me, right? But they don't realize that that activity is actually logged, and when it's logged, again, I don't have the example of it because I haven't got to that in my series. That will be part 10. But once it's removed, you can basically kind of get the idea of the life cycle. So you could see that, oh, this particular user added it on this date with this configuration. Then maybe they modified it, or maybe they didn't modify it, and then finally this was removed. And when it's removed, the important thing is that you won't know exactly what was in that TABL entry. All you get is the ID. So you can kind of see this ID thing here, right? This ID here. And the way you kind of quote unquote decipher that is it's quite difficult to do, because the way this ID works, right, is this ID is basically representing that TABL entry. Well, if that TABL entry has been removed, how would you know what that ID correlates to? You wouldn't. The only way you'd know that is if you have the creation event or the modification event, which may give you the details of that TABL entry. So why I say this is because when someone adds something to a TABL, a new entry to a TABL, have some sort of change management process that records it, what it's for, why is it there, what is the config, who's approved this, like all those kind of things, right? With the ID as well, which you can get from PowerShell after you've created it. Because then in future, if that was to get removed, you can easily go back to that change management record, do a Control F for this kind of string, and then see, oh yeah, this corresponds to, I don't know, Zoom. Right, this was added by Prav, whatever. Right, this was added in March 2024, whatever it is. Right, at least you'd get a much better understanding as to why it was there, what it was for, and who did it. And then that allows you to be much more mature from kind of an incident response perspective. And so that's point 4B. And again, hopefully that was useful to your audience. And then finally, we have the submissions. So I touched on the submissions thing earlier, but the way submissions work is you can allow your users to report emails. So let's say they report it as junk, they report it as phishing, things like that. And if they report it as phishing or for junk, you can allow it to say, I want to allow it to report to Microsoft as well, which would, enhance Microsoft signals, etc. Now, from a security perspective, especially in mature organizations, you ideally do not want users to be able to directly report it to Microsoft. Reason is because maybe that email contains something business sensitive. Why would you want it leaving your organization and going to Microsoft? Yes, we trust Microsoft. They're a big organization. We have NDAs. But wouldn't you rather control the data that you have, especially if it's sensitive? Okay, so you can instead have an admin report. And the way that works is the admin could manually report it, or the user's reported emails could go to some sort of admin mailbox that people would then review, assess, and then basically send it to Microsoft if they want to. And I'll show a picture of that in a minute. And then finally, we have ZAP, right? So I touched on ZAP earlier, but ZAP is basically 0-hour auto purge. And Shady, again, why this is helpful is because this will take action even before the email is delivered. So if, for example, like we saw earlier, if it's detected as phish, it would straight away hit the quarantine. That's ZAP doing that. The way Zap helps here is if a user reports an email or an admin reports an email to Microsoft that came through but shouldn't have, once Microsoft determined that it is malicious and you have Zap enabled, it will go back and proactively try and purge those emails because it uses Zap to say, hey, this email got sent to Prav. Oh, it also got sent to Shady. It also got sent to Bill. It also got sent to Harry. It will try and purge it from all those mailboxes, but that's only if you have Zap enabled, right? Now, before I come onto the pictures, once again, here's a QR code which will take you to this Learn page that you can read for more information. But basically, yeah, which will take you to this page here. But this is the kind of flow. So within Defender on the left-hand side, under investigation and response and submissions, you can basically see your submissions. And one thing I like, right, I actually noticed this only today. I'm not sure how long they've had it, but they have these kind of quick videos on the right-hand side. So for people unfamiliar with submissions or people that want to learn the tooling, they can easily watch these short videos. They're only like 4 minutes, as it says. And you can kind of click through and, watch the different videos and read it and basically understand what the submissions does. But at a high level, you can see you've got emails, you've got Teams messages, you've got attachments, you've got URLs, and you've got user reported. So that gives you an idea of what you can submit. Right? So you can submit emails for the 30 days, you can submit Teams messages, you can submit attachments, etc. And you can see this button here, which says submit to Microsoft for analysis. What that will do is it will report it to Microsoft to enhance their signals, okay? But as we mentioned, we may not want users to directly report it to Microsoft. So how do we prevent that? So if you go into settings within Defender XDR, which is right at the bottom here, okay, and then you go to email and collaboration and you go to user reported settings. These are the kind of options you can see. So firstly, you may want users to report it within Outlook. So they get an option like phishing, junk, not junk, right? Then you can add some other conditions. So when the user reports an email, you can ask them to confirm, because what happens if they misclick it and they don't actually want to report it? Well, if you don't have them confirm, then that could just cause unnecessary burden for your SOC teams, because they would have to deal with those reported emails, right? And you can also choose the customized message that you want to give. Maybe you could say, for example, I know that the BBC, when I attended a recent talk, they mentioned that if a user reports a phishing email and it's actually phishing, they have less training to do. That's a fantastic incentive, right, for people that want to report phishing emails. So you could put some sort of success message here to say, thank you for reporting this email. If this is confirmed phishing, you'll be given, I don't know, 2 points on whatever platform or tooling or portal or something that you guys have internally. And then basically that person will know that, oh, hey, I'm likely to get less training now because maybe I've reported this phishing email, right? It's a really good incentive, because ultimately your users are the ones that are going to catch these emails. You can have all the policies and things in place, but if a user clicks on that email and puts in their credentials, your controls are slightly kind of weakened a bit, right? Human is the weakest element, as they say. It's sad to say, but it's still true. Okay, so empower your users to report phishing emails through those kind of incentives. I'm not sure how many organizations actually are doing that, but the BBC definitely are, and they mentioned it was quite successful. So just mentioning it. But if you scroll down on this page, here is basically where you can specify where it goes to. Okay, so specifically this option here. So you can see send reported messages to Microsoft and my reporting mailbox. You can change that to Microsoft only, or you can change that to my reporting mailbox only. And if you choose anything that has a reporting mailbox option, you do need to specify a mailbox to send it to, right? Which could be like a SOC mailbox, a shared mailbox, ideally within a team, and things like that. So what will happen then is that you'd have to have some sort of kind of operational workflow defined to say, hey, if an email comes into this mailbox, we need to investigate it. Maybe you could build a playbook for that. High level things would be like checking the URLs, checking the attachments, checking the headers, looking at similar communications, all those kind of things, and then basically making a judgment call if this is malicious, if this is suspicious, or if this is legitimate. And if it's legitimate, then you can release it back to the user, or you can thank them for it and let them know that, hey, this isn't malicious, but you can unsubscribe if it's spam. If it is malicious, you can then kick off that workflow to say, hey, thank you for reporting. You'll now have 1 less training next month. I don't know, whatever you want to do. And if it's suspicious, then you could maybe advise the user to just delete it. It's not malicious, but if it's just annoying to them, they could just delete it or unsubscribe as well. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the default option here is send it to Microsoft and my reporting mailbox. If you don't have that mailbox configured, it's going to go straight to Microsoft. Okay. And if you have it set to just Microsoft, then obviously it's going to go to Microsoft. And if you have it set to My Reporting Mailbox, then you need to make sure you have a mailbox configured, because otherwise it will just kind of get lost in the ether. So best practice here is basically have the option to say send it to reporting mailbox only, and have your SOC team or SOC admins or whoever it is make a judgment call on those emails, and then and only then decide to send it to Microsoft. That way you prevent any sensitive organizational data leaving your company. Okay. And that's basically the 5 kind of points of MDO in a nutshell. So to recap, we had the RBAC, because roles are obviously important in terms of access. We had the Threat Explorer, which allows you to kind of see metadata of emails for the last 30 days. We had KQL hunting for any sort of threat hunters or proactively kind of seeking out threats. We had the TABL, which is a very powerful tool, can be used to basically allow certain companies to bypass all your controls, or more likely could be used to block sort of malicious domains from entering your organization. We saw how to audit TABL entries from creation, modification to removal. And finally, we had the submissions, which basically allows you, your users, to report emails. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. More likely, you want admins to be able to deal with that, and then basically escalate to Microsoft as and when needed. And if Microsoft make a judgment call that, hey, this should be blocked, if you have Zap configured, which you should, then it would try and basically purge those emails to further reduce the blast radius. But yeah, that's 5 things about Defender for Office that I thought was worth sharing based on my sort of security and incident response experience.
Thank you, Parav. I mean, this is really insightful. Like I said earlier, someone coming from a different background, especially from an Intune background, I think this is very insightful because, I always think of the SOC team. They are very just annoying people that if I want to do any changes within the Intune, I have to meet their compliance policy from the SOC team. But then you have it, and then I hear you out. It is. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of things to configure on the tenants, on the portals itself. And now I can have a rough understanding why these compliance policies and security policies need to be met, and how important to communicate always with the SOC team. Yeah, that was very insightful.
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, there is a bonus 6th point, which we don't have time for right now, but it is the policies point. So you can basically set up Defender for Office policies, like you can have anti-spam policies, anti-phishing policies, all of that, right? So anti-spam could be a way to prevent external forwarding. So let's say you don't want organizations to forward data to, let's say, their Gmail. You can set up anti-spam outbound policies to prevent any sort of emails flowing to, let's say, Gmail, Hotmail, Outlook, etc., which again reduces your exfiltration. But yeah, I completely agree with you that the business should definitely keep on top of what the SOC are feeding back. But again, it goes back to the point that what the SOC say is coming from a technical security standpoint. It needs to be translated in a more wider kind of business sense to actually get done what the SOC want it to do, because otherwise it could just sound like the SOC are moaning or complaining. But if it's translated in the right way, then it can actually achieve bigger success, especially if you have big organizations with a lot of politics, bureaucracy, red tape, compliance checks, etc. You need someone to kind of go through that complexity and translate what the SOC are saying in a business outcome focused manner to actually achieve that success, and it's quite difficult to do. So but all you can do is report those things and put it through the life cycle. And then if later on, like what your example you said, well, now you've been compromised, at least the SOC team or whoever can say, well, we did tell you, you chose not to act on it, right? So but yeah, no, this was really good, and glad to teach you something new, Shady. I know you're very much Intune focused. Definitely it's worth stepping outside of Intune a bit, I suppose, and learning a bit about Defender. And again, Defender XDR is a stack of solutions. This is just one component, which is Defender for Office. There's also Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Endpoint, and Entra ID identity protection as well as Defender vulnerability management and the security exposure management. So there's quite a few solutions within the Defender stack. So for anyone watching that wants to kind of get ahead with Defender, I would recommend pursue the SC900 certification, which covers the Defender kind of fundamentals, and then look to take the SC200, which goes a bit deeper. But don't get overwhelmed with all the solutions. Stick to one. go deep into it, find which one resonates with you, and then get better over time. I'm still learning. Every day is a school day, as they say. So
if I
yeah.
want to learn more about Defender for Office, whom do I need to follow? For Microsoft blogs, they are good.
Yeah.
But I think if I take it from if I read from an expert perspective, it's quicker and it gets to the point.
Sure.
Which website should I be following?
Yeah, it's a good question. I try and post about Defender for Office from time to time, so I could be one selfishly saying. But other than that, yeah, certifications, like I said, SC200. In terms of people in the community, there isn't like a go-to person that I can think of for Defender for Office. But what I can recommend is there's the Microsoft Customer Connection Program, which is aka.ms/join-CCP. Now, the benefit there is you need an NDA between your organization and Microsoft, but it allows you to get direct access to the product group as well as other people in the community. And I found that's a really great way because you can feedback your questions. They can then weigh in based on their insight. You can also learn from the product group. For example, they'll have a lot of NDA kind of calls about roadmaps, new features, private previews, etc. That's a really good way to learn. But other than that, I think there's quite a few videos on YouTube. I don't really have any names off the top of my head, but if you were to search Defender for Office, you'd find a few people there. But there's not like a go-to person I can think of for Defender for Office at the moment. There's a few for like Defender for Endpoint, Entra, Purview as well, but no one directly comes to mind for Defender for Office. So I would say the best way to learn is, Microsoft Learn, like you said, SC200, the CCP. And one other thing, actually, I just remembered is the Ninja training. So Microsoft have Ninja training for all the kind of Microsoft solutions mostly. And I think for Defender for Office, it would be aka.ms/MDO Ninja. And maybe we can put that link in the description, Shady, afterwards. But that is basically the Ninja training for Defender for Office. So it'll walk you through how to, architect to configure it, how to walk through the kind of incident response, security operations kind of lifecycle, as well as sort of maturity items as well. So there's all these kind of things, but I think, just feel free to research. Like you can Google, you can YouTube Defender for Office. There's different kind of virtual conferences and events where people do talks, like the way I'm doing this kind of talk, and find ones about Defender for Office. Maybe you'll learn some even more insight. Maybe I'll do a future one of a deep dive of an actual incident. Who knows? So I think that's a really good way to learn, because you're right. Microsoft Learn is very generic, respectfully speaking, but I think it's better to learn the insight from people that have actually gone through it in the trenches. Because look at already, right? If you were just reading the Microsoft Learn pages for those 5 topics I gave, I don't think you would have resonated with the content as much as when I said, this is what I've seen and this is what is best practice and things like that. But yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of like a go-to person for Defender for Office. But yeah, CCP, Microsoft Learn, SC200, Ninja Training, and Google and YouTube are probably your best friends for learning more, as well as myself, because I try and post about Defender for Office from time to time. There's actually a book, I just remembered, sorry. There's a Defender for Office book by Pact, recently published in September. So that could be another good resource. And there's also quite a few other Defender XDR books by Pact, which would also include Defender for Office. But there is a new book dedicated to Defender for Office, which I'm looking forward to receiving soon. And that's specific about Defender for Office. So that could actually be probably a really best resource, because the fact it's a book, obviously it's gone through various amounts of review, approval, etc. So it should be really high quality. So that could be one option for your audience to kind of purchase and look at as well.
This sounds really, really interesting. Yes, there you have it, folks. I will be linking the Ninja website down below, and Purav's blogs as well down below. And I hope you've learned something like I did. I've learned a lot from this episode. And catch you on the next one. Thank you, Purav.
Thank you, Shady, for having me. Take care, guys. Bye.